Okay, I'm Bob Doyle. I am initially an astronomer. I got my PhD at Harvard in 1968 and then went to work with NASA a little bit on the Skylab astronauts, and so I had a scientific career, but my wife had the same degree from the same university, and we ran into what are called anti-nepotism rules for you gray hairs in the field. She couldn't get a job at the same university I did. So I told her, let's sit tight in Cambridge, where we still are, and I'll go out and start a company and make enough money to be able to do whatever I want for the rest of my life. Well, I started a company, became $1 million company. It's still in California. It never made me any money. However, I learned a lot about technology, and so I invented some of the first handheld electronic games in the 1970s. One called Merlin from Parker Brothers, paid a little tic-tac-toe games, musical games and things. And I have enough money to do whatever I want. But whatever I really want to do is to work in philosophy. But my degree is in science, and philosophers don't want to hear from scientists. So I've had a kind of interesting relationship. Anyway, in the I just wanted to get right into my talk then. As Dave said, there's two ways to look at getting information out of a book. One is to search it today. And my students really all tell me that a Google search is fantastic. And write your paper, get research from it by looking at web pages and then incorporating the ideas into your work. But it turns out that when you really want to get into a topic and know something to write original material, you consult a textbook, and the textbooks have these pointers, indexes into the material, and then you really can get to know the material, know the jargon, know the language, and then you're better prepared to do searches. So when you're at the end of your research project, you go back and you use what you now know about the field, and you search for the most current information, and you bring your paper to fruition, right? So the question I have for you today is, when will a well-curated digital index, which has been prepared not only by professional indexers, but my apologies, and Heather's told me this, sometimes the best indexer is the author, himself or herself. But you need help of a professional indexer, and I got it from Heather. So the question then becomes, can an online book, and how many of you have used any of these tablets for reading books? It's sort of rare, I'm glad to see about a fifth of you. So you all know that, for example, in the Kindle Paperwhite, you can change the font size. And when you change the font size, there's very little text on each page, and the page numbers, if there are any, are not easy to find. And Amazon basically says, we don't need page numbers anymore, and I've made it very difficult, as Dave says, to actually get them in. But my point about this is a word or a phrase in a multi-level index means so much more than my idea of what to put in to do the Google search. I might put in suicide, I won't find it in Hamlet, as Dave says. So it seems to me that an index has deep semantic meaning, let's see if I can learn how to drive this guy. Go on. Okay, so after starting a couple of companies and making a lot of money, in the 1980s, I turned to building a desktop publishing system so I could write my books. Now you may say, that's pretty stupid. Why not just write the book? But I'm very technically oriented, and so I became the 11th certified developer for Apple Macintosh. I had been dealing with Steve Jobs, trying to sell him some technology. Loved the Mac when it came out. I asked for permission to develop on it, and I became the 11th developer. So I wrote a program before there was a PageMaker, before there was a Quark Express, before there was an Adobe InDesign. I wrote Mac Publisher, and we sold 20,000 copies, eventually sold the product, the publishing system, to Letraset for $500,000. At that time, I also wrote an indexing program, and Dave may remember those years, some, and a hyphenation program for reasons I wanted to be able to do that with my books. But, as I say here, I procrastinated for 25 years before getting back to my books. And in the meantime, Quark Express, Adobe InDesign had developed really lovely tools. And over the years, I researched a number of other things that are in your field. Content management, information architecture, belong to the IA, Peter Morville's group. Multilingual, because I wanted my books in multiple languages. Web publishing, taxonomies, control vocabularies, everything that Heather's now talking to you about I tried to learn about these well enough to use them. I also became a journalist. So in the 1990s, I was the digital video editor for New Media Magazine, which was our leading magazine for digital content, right? And I also then wrote for E-Content magazine. Do you know these magazines at all? How many of you heard of these magazines? Well, not too many. That's interesting. You're in the publishing industry. I'm in the sort of media communications industry, so to speak. I wrote about 80 columns for E-Content magazine on a lot of those topics, which you are involved in. Now, how many of you are members of STC, Technical Communication Society? Again, very few. I was sort of expecting more. Your companies certainly work and create tools for communicators. So I wrote a cover story on content management in 2006 or 7, and another article on Darwin information typing architecture, which had a big flash for a few years. I'm not sure how successful it is today. So I also created a number of websites which were resource tools where I learned about tools. So I created a site called Content Management System Review and organized a conference at Harvard on open source content management systems. We had 300 people from all over the world who were trying to make content management tools like Drupal and WordPress, although that's also commercial. I then created a web page called Taxo Tips, which has a number of things. Yeah. So so now here's my website, which is called Information Philosopher. And on that website, I decided to make a web index, as Dave mentioned. And I wanted a name index or an author index and a subject index. And my plan was to go to the web and show you these things, but in the interest of time, I'll perhaps do that later if I have time. And it's arranged in such a way that an important term can go to a search of the entire website, which is a couple thousand pages. Or you can search on a name and find that name anywhere, or you can go to a specific page on the site that's that person's work. I've read and written about 200 philosophers, most dead, and another 100 scientists who have done work in my field. And here is a glossary, and in this case my glossary is highly hyperlinked, so that if you go to a term like actual sequence, it tells you, well, these other links are related to this subject. And you can drive around within the index and sort of learn about what's connected to what and what the important terms of use are. Okay. I'm not sure why I'm not going forward. Somewhere I've gone back. It looks like I'm going backwards. And I did, of course, a site map so that you can see at a glance where everything is on the website, which is kind of complicated. So anyway, in 2010, I started converting some of the web pages I've written, a huge amount of material in philosophy, into books. And this is my first book. But when I converted the book at Amazon using Kindle KDP conversion processes, all my page numbers disappeared. Because as Dave said, in the early days, I wrote this in 2011, the Amazon stripped out the page numbers. And I said, what can you do without page numbers? How can a professor assign reading this chapter, this page, whatever? So there are two kinds of EPUBs that Dave mentioned in EPUB 3 today. There's what's called a fixed layout publication, and there's a flowable publication. All the fixed layout books really look just like the book. They have all the characteristics of the book, section headings and so forth. But a reflowable book is just text, a stream of text, and you keep switching between the pages. The microphone. I'm not sure. Oh, I see. Are you hearing me all right in the back? Okay. I tend to wander around. All right. So most of the early Kindle readers only gave you reflowable text, and they didn't support real page numbers. But actually, I solved this problem a couple of years before Dave's team got Adobe to do the right thing. And I'm not exactly sure if I remember exactly how I did it at the time. This is Amazon's policy. I won't read it. They say, strip out the page numbers, except if you have them in the index, and this becomes the question I have. So what I actually did was I exported the EPUB3 file, and I used InDesign, of course, as my tool, and all the InDesign elements were automatically were removed. So what I did was I took the whole copy of the file and I went into a duplicate of the InDesign book. And I went in and I located all the paragraphs and I made little pictures of page numbers. This was silly. I should have just used text, which I do now in my later books. And I put it in each and every one. And so I sent it back to Amazon Kindle Publishing, and lo and behold, all my page numbers appeared in the book and the index at the end. So this is not the sort of thing, let's see, let me just go on with this. There's the page number guidelines. I'm sorry, my right arrow is not moving it. Everybody can help me. How about a space bar?
The down arrow, use the down arrow.
Down arrow, thank you. There we go. So here's an example of the Kindle, and you see in the middle there that I've got a number 330 entered, and you can either press for the page or the location in the book. And when you increase the font size, you go from a few hundred pages to 1,400 locations in the book. So here it is, down arrow, come on, Bob. No, down arrow isn't doing anything either. Sorry, guys. I can't, I just don't know what's happening here. Okay, on the left is this little paperwhite, and you see, if you can read it, the little page number at the top, 330, is where it's gone. That's a view in the Kindle Fire when it's being used as a reflowable display. And this is the way the book looks in InDesign. On the left, we see all the decorative materials which are going to be lost. When you go to a reflowable book, you'll only get the flow of text. If you look up to the right, you'll see I took the page of the book, made a copy of the book, and then I went to each and every paragraph or each and every page location, and I put in a little text, 63 at the top there, which made the thing go out of bounds of the box. But now, when I published that to Kindle, they reported back page numbers. And I gave each page number a style as page number, so that, as you were mentioning, Dave, this machine is not only blinking, but my pages are blinking. I have no hands on it at the time, I'm sorry. This is the XHTML that Dave was talking about, and I don't hope you can read it. This print's a little small, but I put arrows on the points where you see the arrow is to the thing called class page-number 63, the one I entered. I entered it over there in the text of InDesign as a page number style element, and when Kindle processed it in their conversion system, it came out as a page number. Okay? So why do we really need page numbers? Because readers can then know, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh well, my apologies, folks, but we need them so a reader knows what page they're on. You're going to drive?
Right,
yeah. And so scholars can know what page to cite when they've read the book, and they say, I want to cite Doyle said so-and-so. Okay, it's on page 63. I've made that possible. And the third reason is so students can know that they're reading the right assignment, in case you use traditional say what to read. Okay, and at the bottom of the page, there's a link to a thing I wrote, and I think none of you, knowing now my audience, are going to want to do what I did. So I'm here as an example of an author who wanted to get an index that had page numbers in it. So go ahead. So in my print books, as you see, I have some innovations. Along the left side here, you see I have tabs called bleeds. Each chapter has a bleed, so you can know exactly which chapter you're in, and that seems to me important. I hate books where you go to the end notes, and there it says chapter 17, and there's all interesting notes, and you want to go back and find them, and you have no clue where chapter 17 is, unless what I do is I have these dark bleed tabs on the edge so you can quickly, or in fact I can wave it at you. This is one of my books, and you see the tabs, and you see they show up so you know which chapter you're in, and so forth. I like to innovate things, as you can see. And maybe then the next one, I want to thank Heather, because when I wrote my first book in 2011, it had what's called a single level index. It just had a term and then had all the entries. And that's what I did when I wrote my own indexing program back in 1984. But she taught me that indexes are much more valuable if you have a multi-level, so that you can go into an area under a term and then find many subterms. And so she helped me make the index for my book called Great Problems. And I learned enough from her so that my third book was out last year, has one I learned to do myself and she's too busy with her work and her company to help me with the index as she did for the first one. So maybe one more there, please. Well, this is just to say, and again, wrong audience, my books are all available on the web, free, because I want to make sure students don't have to pay a lot of money to read a lot, and my books are available as PDF downloads. PDFs have the same indexing capabilities in them. And basically that's it.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to take one question while we'll save it to the end?
Sure. Any questions? Oh, I did not do a handout, but on my website, on this, there's a link at informationphilosopher.com/presentations/SSP, where you can have this whole colored slide presentation. And also there's a link to how to do what I did, which I wrote up, and it's on the web there. In case, but again, as I say, you're not the people who had to do anything as kind of personal and idiosyncratic as I did. Is that a question there? Yeah.
One more question. You showed the glossary on the
Yep,
on your
on
site.
my website,
Yeah,
information.
and it had links in the hyperlinks in the glossary text.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I can drive around the glossary and see, oh, this is related to this term, but then you get to understand why it's a little different. I'm sorry.
So my question is, when you hit those links, are they the same links as in the subject index?
Some are,
Okay.
but not always, because the website, I've been writing it for 20 years. What's in the books is now a decision between me and Heather as to what really were the right important terms to put into the index. But from the beginning, the website is heavily interlinked, using hyperlinks, because I'm a big believer. Tim Berners-Lee, I met with him and my son, and he made us a lot of suggestions for the content management system that I use for Information Philosopher. So it's highly linked. Every page, every paragraph, if there's a word in there that really needs to, or a person, that's a link to the other material in the Information Philosopher website. Okay?
So
Yeah.
if you were building it today, would the links in the glossary be the same as the links in the subject index?
I think we would try to standardize that, using the lessons of this technology that you guys are going to implement. It definitely should be the case, because there are jargons, and then there are, the best terms that could be used, and not use an accidental similar word that would confuse the reader. So I have that all in mind. It hasn't been done because I've been doing this for a long time.
Okay. We're all set here. Thank you.